Tag zusammen. Also ich habe 24 Minuten nur.
Okay, I only have 24 minutes, so I'll try to keep myself short. I am criminal biologist, and so this is my logo. Can you turn the light down a tiny bit? Kind of turn off the spots. Yes, here. So here you can see this is supposed to be a symbolically checked case. Can you turn off the spots a bit so the screen is more visible? Here you can see that I work in different countries and see completely different kinds of animals and see these different climate things and that there are completely different perspectives there. I would say the most important thing is measuring and doing things instead of just talking. Can you please turn down the lights a bit? And so it would be good to do that. So here, just an example from the Republica's website. The catering in Republica is meatless starting in 2022. We want to have a vegan offering only in the long run. Maybe you've heard the last 30 years. Why don't we just make it vegan right now? Because as long as you're still using cow's milk, which is obviously vegetarian and there's no meat, and you still have a massive impact on the environment, massive CO2 emissions. So I really don't understand why it's still necessary. Or also on the website, starting in 2022, we'll have a CO2 balancing sheet and we'll verify whether we can compensate for our emissions. I mean, it is 2022. Why don't you just do it right now? I mean, that's essentially, what I deal with. But then even at a conference like this where everyone knows everything, it still isn't being done. And so biodiversity, which is what I want to talk about, is dependent on these animal-based products. And so the so-called CO2 impression or emission standard is not that important for someone like me. What's important is the biodiversity impact. This is a report from WWF. So if you eat vegan food, that doesn't make much of a difference to vegetarians as opposed to so-called flexitarians. But of course, it would still be the correct decision because it prevents a lot of animal suffering, right? So you see there is still a resistance to the conclusions that come from these measurements. So these things about reducing CO2 emissions, a lot of that is still a thing, right? So some of you might not believe that this was in 1970s, so that was Earth Day. They already had the buttons. It looked exactly the same as with Friday for Future. There's no difference to Fridays for Future, absolutely no essential difference. They had buttons. It was on the front page of the New York Times that allegedly 1 million people joined for Earth Day. That's what it looked like. There were tons of people. Time passed. Then there was World Animal Protection Day, protect the owls. That was in the 60s. And then in the last 2 years, there were lots of books that were published. For example, here from the United Nations, there's an urgent need for a clear break with current trends. But as I just showed, even here at Republica, people don't go the last mile, just do it vegan and say things like, milk, it's not that problematic, even though it still is attached to that animal suffering. At the same time, it's getting drier and drier. Obviously, you all know that because you read the newspaper and the internet, Twitter, TikTok. But what does that mean for biodiversity? When it gets drier, then maybe animals can't drink anything anymore. But of course, it's not everything. So let's look at how temperatures are rising. I want to show you that, as I mentioned, based on measurements and facts. But I think you'll be able to survive for just a few more minutes, right? So maybe this is what you've seen this. There's these climate bars. So back in the day, it was that the average temperature was sometimes colder, and now it's just getting warmer and warmer. You see that line, you can imagine where it's going. If you talk about the people who were part of a massive expedition to the North Pole, where some Germans also were part of that, you can tell that the temperature of air on the surface is also rising. So the redder it is, the warmer it gets. And up there at the pole, it's especially warm, right? So like same way you just heard when we talk about fascists who are just scared, let's call them scared people. Maybe they might say, it doesn't affect us, but that's completely wrong. Because if you look at global temperature change, then this is what that looks like. So let's see how temperature has changed over time. Can you maybe turn on the lights a bit so it's more visible? And here you can see how the deviation in the middle, you have the years. And here you have these circles, and it's just further and further towards the 1.5 degree target. Thank you so much, your gods and goddesses. Here you can already tell that it's impossible to reach the 1.5 degree target. So that's bad. Okay, so what does it have to do with animals? We're also not going to reach the 2 degree target. We're not going to reach that. It's completely impossible. I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to get into that in detail. But the main thing is that we need to try to get towards a stabilized Earth that is maybe still warmer than what we expected. But right now we're rolling towards this hothouse Earth, right? So there you have time, that's stability. Of the system Earth that includes biodiversity, plants and animals, and many other things. And all of this is going down the drain right now. But why? Why, right? Like animals coming from the Mediterranean can just go elsewhere, but it doesn't work that quickly, right? So this is happening way too fast. And then in addition to that, there are also other things that are happening that you might not even think of. For example, as a biologist, if you look at what happens if they're simply just completely normal animals, such as insect, when it gets too warm for them, then they can't reproduce. Why? I know this looks very boring. I mean, you can watch this again. But for example, if you look at species extinction, right, at their movement, where maybe your mom told you, oh, don't wear like tight clothes like that, or your sperm can't move. So for example, if something gets tighter and tighter, or in this case, if the temperature rises more and more, the less and less can the sperm move, right? So here you have female reproductive organs, and here you have male reproductive organs, and so it's harder for them to reproduce. So this is a completely stupid, banal example that I couldn't have thought of, that because of the heat, animals just can't reproduce as well. So it's not useful for them if they come from warmer regions to the previously colder regions, which are also getting warmer and warmer. They just can't do that. So this is causing an economic problem.
And that's 2 years ago in England, the Gupta report came out where the government said we can't continue. The Ministry of Finance, the state's organization, it won't become more statey, especially with the Brits who are oriented very market fashion. They said we can't continue. Here, it's people don't dare to say this. I have to. So I had to delete things where sponsors couldn't say that they they're asked to delete things. Why are there wasps? This is from August 2018, and transmission of pollen doesn't happen with honeybees. The only transmission with honeybees would go down. The industrial production would go down. So the only thing we need is flies and wasps. And if you only cared about industry and wouldn't care about the animals and stuff, then you would still have to say shit. We have to say. The way they are dying, we're losing wasps. Nobody knew a few years ago that they have this pollination, do this pollination in normal biosystem, and then we would all lose. People don't know about insects, and then they would put a bee basket on their roofs. Biologically, that's nonsense. We need biodiversity. So how does this work? How fast, quickly does this work? From a colleague, she went to a place where she looked at vertebrates in 2010 gazelles, there were 5,000 gazelles, and 2019 there were only 819. No matter where we look, the populations are breaking together. Let's see at giraffes. Look at giraffes. Giraffes are losing, rhinos are dying. then the lions are dying. If you give animals enough space by eating plants, then they will replicate by themselves. But all the animals are dying because we're not caring and because we're saying whatever. So where's my clock? Okay, fantastic. How do we know that they're dying? We heard a talk about fascism earlier on. We could deny this, of course, but I will show you a few examples. One example, we go to thousands of mummies in Palermo, and we get the insects from their bodies. So they've been put in there thousands of years ago, and then in these. And there, we know that which animals lived there. There's fossilized animals, the second animal, and then there's dried animals. And then you could build traps, for example. There's a ministry that tries to do this without killing the animals. You put up a tent-like trap, and then animals fly in there, and there's a dead animal, and then they try to put in eggs, for example, and then the larvae exist, and then they decompose the animal. And then there's also animals that go in there that want to use the animal as a breeding place. And then there's mites, for example. You can see what lives there, and what you can find is at the end how when animals flew in there and the killing flask, it's stunning. Well, we call it stunning flask, but it's actually a killing flask. And these experiments are done worldwide. For example, I'll show you how you can find how many animals can you find. This is from an. This is the Latin names of different types of animals. So every time we look at this, we see diversity. For example, a few weeks ago, a colleague from Colombia named a fly after me, and I named an animal that after her that I found on a rotting pig. So that's love amongst people who works on insects. And there's a lot of this unknown, and a lot of this is still measured. So. We'll show you what dirt looked 20 years old. This is dirt 20 years old from everything. This is behind your cupboards, for example. There used to be insects. Today you could put everything out. No matter what you want, you will never find as many insects. Let's go. Yeah, this was the study in a nature reserve from people in reserve. There's more than 75% decline in the last 27 years in the nature reserve in Germany have died. And you have a look, is he really dead if someone dies and stuff? But if you get a diagnosis, then someone gets cancer. Maybe you say maybe you don't get cancer, and they say, well, it's badly calculated, and so on and so on. That is what we let's look at the world. This is part of the world. This is Germany, and then it's a very densely populated place of the earth. It's not clear to people. We use land in a very intensive way, but if you look at Germany, for example, through the Jainism, you only see the destroyed nature. All the nice green fields are completely destroyed nature. This is Krefeld, and this is they put up a tent. In this tent, where the same case with our decomposing pig, and up there is the stunning flask, and they looked at this since 1989, and the first study was there with the results since 2016, and they measured length of days. You can see the mean of exposure time. So they measured for 17,000 days, 46 years, and they found 54 kilograms of insects. It's great. You can find nothing better in biology. And you can see that what happened, it's super crazy. The line goes down, and the grams of insects per day is declining. There's a gram per day. The biomass, this can change over the years, but over the course of the year. But you can see that you can see that also declining. Krefeld Nature Reserve, whatever you might say, but we know the background dying rate of animals, extinction rate of animals. We know we've known over the centuries through, for example, fossils. You can see the dotted line, but changes happen. But you can see this until 2014. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. But all types of animals that you're researching, amphibians have already died, vertebrates, etc., etc. I don't want to say don't want to say the number, but you can see. You can calculate maybe, but you can calculate how much the background extinction rate has gone up in the last century. Nobody knew where that comes from, but you can do a factorialized research or something like that. You can See, they thought maybe it was about the drought or something, but most of it was unknown. So people said, well, it's something bigger, and instead of people said. Instead of doing radical change, like instead of, for example, doing it vegan, and then they rather said we would do small changes, like turning everything vegetarian at Republica. So you ask people what is the most deadly insecticide, and they would say, if you ask people, they would say DDT. And then from DDT, birds died and everything. And this is DDT. You have a look at the toxicity is 1. The environmental nicotinides are not so much involved anymore, but the insecticides today are 10,000 times stronger than DDT. So nobody thought it's about neonicotinoids that are brought out next to nature reserves. So this is how we get to zero. The same as happened in 1970. We already knew in 1970, and people said, "Okay, well, I'll eat less meat or something and drive less cars." No. So how?
So how rapidly is the number of insects sinking? So has this been confirmed by now? Let's look at the newest, most up-to-date data. So this is from 2022. You will laugh because they have all these funny names: earworms, weird kinds of butterfly. Maybe that's weird, dark mosquitoes, but the violet, that's the decline. So these are species. So it's the number of species within different groups. For example, these dancing flies. But for most of these, you can tell that, for example, ants, almost all types of ants are gone. So when maybe you thought that you misheard when I said amphibian animals are dying. So imagine that 20 years ago, someone would have told you that you lived on a planet where all amphibian life forms had died. You maybe would have said that that's insane, but obviously you can measure and do something instead of just talking. You can measure and then learn from the measurements and then actually do something, and that's what we do. So let's look at these measurements. This has been known for ages, 2006. So for by our standards, a long time ago, we looked at moths in England. Moths, down. And then people say, but in Northern England, they kind of went up. Yeah, of course, because in the north, but look at how far they went down in the south and overall. So all of this has been known since 1970. So let's look at measurements that looked at butterflies. Everyone loves butterflies, other than these other animals that we looked at. So here, again, very clear. since 1990, so it hasn't been that long, until 2015, bam, also just down into the basement. No matter which country you look at, the colleagues in the Netherlands did that. It's always like this, down like this. And no matter where, no matter when, no matter which statistics, no matter what anyone else is telling you, no matter whether it's logical, credible, or close to your lived reality, it is hasn't been measured 10,000s of times, right? So we live on a collapsing planet. Where the entire biodiversity systems are just being burned down and collapsing. I'm really sorry that I'm annoying you with this like this, because I really want to show you that these numbers exist, because people constantly ask me, why have I not heard about this? Because you don't give a shit. That's why you haven't heard about it. Yeah. That, right? Like, there are thousands of publications. For example, here, until 2017, here you can see how does the number of arthropods decline, right? So this is from Nature. I'm only showing you things from very well-respected journals. Biomass going down, frequency going down, number of species is going down. So it's always the same trend. And as I mentioned, this also affects birds, which I think is especially wild, because here you can see the link to agriculture, right? So here, these are birds going down in agriculture, and imagine, just guess, while there are pigeons, sparrows, and other animals live so peacefully together at Berlin main stations, because in Brandenburg they can't live together anymore, right? So they just are there and eat people's vomit, like do all of these things that they otherwise would never do. So they were first at Warschauer Straße, then at Alexanderplatz. Now they're at Berlin Central Station, and guess where they will be in 3 years? They will just be gone. So all of these animals that we see, right, like pigeons, pigeons these are essentially homeless animals who are just kind of trying to press themselves into a biological niche where they can eat bread and vomit. I mean that literally, and that's what that looks like. What could you do? You could, for example, stop using insecticides, right? So not these neonicotinoids, but general insecticides, right? How are you supposed to do that? There's so many people, 10 billion on the earth. How are you supposed to stop using insecticides? Well, very simple. Just listen. Just listen to the people. Just measure instead of thinking, right? Just measure what's happening. You can tell no insecticides used. Then the number of aphids, plant lice that are bad for plants, are very high in agriculture, and ecological agriculture, they're very low. Because at the same time, the animals that actually eat these dangerous lice is going up. So that's not some kind of like weird hipster esoteric talk, right? This is measurable. This has been measured. And when you do that, for example, if you look at ladybirds, everyone loves those. That, for example, this particular type of grain lice, without ladybirds, there's none of them. And once you have ladybirds, they go down. But once you start throwing insecticides at it, like you start this vicious cycle, right? So it's very easy. You look at the measurement, you act. You don't just announce and keep talking, but you do it right now. That's the solution. And then here's the last example. If you say, well, let's just change the genes, then we'll figure it out. I mean, I also have chips implanted in me, RFID, NFT, magnets. I'm not opposed to some kind of cyber whatever, but my NFT chip just has a Rickroll. You can try it if you want. But the animals, right? So even if you just do these tech tricks, right? Nature is ancient. Maybe you've heard Björk say that nature is ancient. It's billions of years older, or hundreds of billions of years older than us. Of course, we can throw at it whatever we want, but the only thing that will happen here's the number of species resistant against certain insecticides, and so the only thing that happens is that the number of species that are unaffected by these insecticides goes up, right? So if you let nature solve it themselves, then it'll solve that. No shit. It has been measured at fruit gardens and whatever. So my time is almost up. I have 7 more minutes. I'm just going to show you a thing from War and Peace, and it says, oh, look, here's this comic that says, oh, hi, Earth, how are you? And Earth says, oh, I'm going to be fine. Things constantly change on Earth, and I've been dealing with this for ages, and I don't know how you're doing as people. And so the people speaking earlier were already talking about the political consequences. And so one person was saying, block everything, use the last 30 years of your life, because everything's going down the drain anyway. of course, it's a difficult starting point because the solution is to leave nature to itself, no ecological blah, 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 but really use measurements from thousands of studies and to deal with this, like the largest nature catastrophe ever, since humans have existed, and the sixth largest extinction of species in the history of the planet. And so this problem is solvable, and it's not just about talking, and we can't just stop using fossil fuels. We also need to, for example, make water free again, start eating plant-based only. You can pick electricity providers that don't use fossil energies, all of the stuff that I don't need to tell you about. But now you've heard my 5 cents from the biological perspective. That is can be attacked very easily and can be solved very easily. Here's my website, and so if you're interested, I have a bunch of videos on here if you want to look at that more. And here's also another podcast, the oldest science podcast from Germany, which is without ads, and so it's all ad-free and legal.
Benecke.
Mark Benecke.
Komm zu mir. 5 Minuten haben wir noch.
Come here. We have 5 more minutes. Oh, it's like a talk show format, right? Wow. I mean, that was a high-speed presentation where you just threw knowledge at us. I mean, okay, I'm just going to try to ask a question, sound smart, based on what you said. There's always these reports from kind of these organic stores. We have these glasses with baby food because the field next to it got an insecticide. So all of a sudden, the vegetables we used for this is now poisonous. And how do we get past that, right? Where fields are being affected by things that are happening on the field next to it.
No, you won't. And it will be forbidden like neonicotinoids and on governmental level, but then everything is burnt on another level. There's 2 interesting things. One is that the rainforest in Brazil is being cut down much more than thought, and that's we've seen this from satellite pictures, and that's the biological organic food is not even the best. It has to also be regional, because otherwise the stuff will be grown in Brazil, and then it's up to the consumer. I'm the last to say the government should do this. I consider. I don't see this as I see this as an excuse. I think it's up to you and me. You bought it, you buy it. Like the other thing is that. Guardian. The other thing is that Guardian published this. Oil companies have their projects that are running now that will use up the CO2 budget they started it now, that will already use up the CO2 budget for the next years, that also is related to all the insects and stuff. And so just do what you can derive from the measurements, and don't do, just say, oh, I'm not eating less meat, but be a little bit vegetarian, but do what is actually necessary. And the usage of internet has, for example, there's, possibilities to reduce your CO2 footprint with using the internet, and it should, your example is just necessary to give you some idea about what can happen, but it's up to everybody.
And what I was really shocked by was this graph that you were showing from the Atlas on insect regarding the species. Why, and that's maybe a very specific question, but why are the ants the first ones that are disappearing?
It's totally unknown. It's also for the amphibians that they have a fungus, and and that's the xenobus, that's used in the research a lot, and why people thought, well, the fungus grew so much because it's so widespread. But now it turns out that the environmental chains are the underlying source, and with ants, it's difficult to research them and spend a lot of time with them. The best colleagues doing that, the Höldobler, who won a Pulitzer Prize, for example, Görlitz, who worked with our ants, who does this nowadays? There's only projects, and who spends is actually their time from the age of 4 to 74 to only spend time with that, and it's very much unknown. It could be with ants. It could be drought or the poisons, or there might be some reason where we find out, okay, that's the reason, but we can't escape that. The animals that go up the mountain even more and more, but as it gets hotter, and at some point they're gone because the mountain is gone. Animals moved away and away. We kill more and more living space for the animals, and it has nothing to do with politics and stuff. It has to do with the individual.
I understand. Thank you so much, Mark, and for washing our heads and making sure that we understand this. That was very fascinating. I learned a lot. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. A large round of applause for Mark, please.